Thank you. Until Yves is here, perhaps you see we have a quarrel with our names, because we always quarrel who is last, not who is first. And so we mixed it, but we don't have any symplegma.
Thank you. Yeah, so welcome to the last presentation of today. I guess you're all tired and want to go home or to go drink beer. Me too. So we try to make it quick. Sorry. Basically, I want to start with a question. Do you know what ossuaries are? So your hand up if you know it. That's quite good. I think we can go home. Right? So anyway, the goal of this presentation is to bring you the history of ossuaries. We tell you what it is, what it was, how it's used today, or how the places are used today. We can tell a couple of stories we encountered during our project, and basically how it started as well. So I want to start with that. Basically, Anna came to me in 2012. No, 2012 was. You're right. Yeah. She said, "Hey, there's a couple of ossuaries. Let's visit them." We thought, yeah, cool. Let's do a small project. I knew there was like 5 or 10 in Switzerland. We thought maybe we can write a paper, do some cool pictures. Yeah, that was it. So we did that. Now it's 2022. We're still talking about it. Quite. It's been a long time. We've visited over 350 places in whole Europe. We've driven about 40,000 kilometers with our car, and now more with the train to get here. Yeah. Basically, the concept that we envisioned during that time, almost 10 years ago, was that we want to combine photography, so I'm a photographer, with text and scientific background, which is what Anna does. Yeah, that's what we did. We have several books published, so we have a couple of them here. If you're interested, you can have a look afterwards. We had articles published, we had lectures, and yeah, now we're here talking about it again. And Anna told me to mention the metal background as well. So it's not quite obvious, but we've seen it earlier before today with the band Tor, being in a photography in the ossuary of Sedlec in Kutna Hora. That was in the 80s, unimaginable today. So, but that's always there in metal culture. So bones, skulls, ossuaries, it's kind of a natural thing that metal people feel comfortable with, I guess, or let's say attracted to the images or the imagery of that. So it kind of fits into today and tomorrow, I guess. Yeah, let's go to the next slide then. That's yours, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say one slide about our theoretical background, and afterwards you will see all the beautiful pictures. But our theoretical background is the theory of Thomas Machel, not Macho, Machel. He's a cultural philosopher, and he argues that death as a concept is something that, just to quote him, he says, a system cannot conceptualize its own ending without contradiction. So death as a concept is opaque and uncontrollable, and we don't really can grasp it. But at the same time, the material is universal in the sense that we see that people die, and we see the transformation that the body goes through in this dying process. And this connection between the uncontrollable, perhaps unthinkable without contradiction, and the seeing is, as he argues, a case for religion. So this is really a project that is in the core of religion.
Yeah, so now the question is, what are ossuaries exactly? So you can see that on the picture. Please go back. It's, in simple terms, it's a room filled with skulls, bones, human remains. Of course, it's more complex than that. If we look at it in this case, we can see it's a sacred room. It's not just any room. It usually is in vicinity of a church on the graveyard. So basically, we can go one. Thanks. So it's in the Roman Catholic context. So the idea was to make room on the graveyards. So that's what's generally suspected. The reason for that we have these places. You can imagine it like that. The graveyard was always in the center of a town or a city or whatever. It had a wall around it historically. I'm not there yet, but yes, that's what it looks like. And the space on the graveyard obviously was limited, and people kept dying for some reason. So the space was quite full after some time, and the problem religiously is that you cannot destroy the bones. So there had to be another solution, and the other solution they came up with, digging up the bones again, maybe after 10 years or 20 years, when everything was decayed except the bones, and they put it in the ossuaries, and you can see them here. This is the ideal graveyard. With the wall, as I mentioned, there is an eternal light that gives the warmth to the dead in purgatory. There is obviously dead people, graves, and there's the ossuary as well. And we don't have that many of them anymore today. I mean, in Switzerland there is 40-ish, I think, 39 maybe, don't remember. But back then there was one in every village. So that's really more or less, let's say, yeah, every village where there was a graveyard. So that was like the standard in a church, I guess. Yeah. And this is how it looks today in Germany. So this is Münster. It's like the border to Czechia. Yeah, that's just one example out of hundreds. You can see there is a big room with skulls. There's another one right left to it with the other bones. So you have like the leg bones and arm bones and the bigger ones usually. And they separated here the skulls for some reason. I don't know what the reason was, but that's one example. So maybe you can have a look at other examples. This is in Austria. Actually, there's a funny story here. I need to tell that. You can imagine it. This is in the Alps. We were there in winter. There was so much snow. My car nearly drove down the cliff because it was icy. And we were there. Our contact, we had an appointment. Our contact didn't show up. Not unusual. Sometimes they really do not show up. And it's that he sent a representative or a deputy. And the guy showing up was an old person. He said, yeah, this is the ossuary. And we were like, okay. Please open the door, we would like to take pictures. And he said, no, I don't think so. And it sounds funny, but it happens a lot. And I was already a little bit annoyed. Anna tried to talk to him, to really persuade him. Yeah, we drove from Switzerland, 5 hours to visit just your place, blah, blah, blah. And he kept saying no to us. And at some point, I was pissed. I started taking pictures from the outside through the tiny windows and the grids that were there. And suddenly Anna came rushing with big eyes. Yeah, we can do it, but we only have 5 minutes. I said, okay, let's do it. He said 5 minutes only, then we need to go again. So I take all my stuff, my flashes, my lenses. I opened the door with the key that she had and ran into the ossuary. And the problem was it was underground. There was a stair down and it was winter. So I fell down the stairs with all my things. And I fell down, the flashes are on the floor, the batteries are out. I'm lying there and I really, literally felt all the skulls looking at me, laughing at me. What the fuck are you doing here? That's the story here. After that, I rushed to take pictures. I did more than 5 minutes, but the person was gone. So we had, 15 minutes maybe. The pictures turned out really good. But yeah, that's one story about how it went. So usually there's no time, there's no light, there's no patience from our guests. And yeah, we try to do our best to do that. Another one is this one. This is really nice. It doesn't always look like that, but we thought to include it anyway, because it's a very special ossuary in Austria as well. It looks similar to Kutna Hora, obviously a lot smaller, but it's not open for public, so you can look through the window, but basically that's it, yeah. And Yeah, this is also really famous. There's painted skulls in Hallstatt, also Austria. So you can see there's the names of the deceased painted on the skulls, sometimes the date of death, sometimes the profession and other information. And this is really like one of the most famous ossuaries, I guess. This is in Graubünden in Switzerland, so in our home region. And they're in the wall there. That's probably also the reason why they're still there, because the ossuary itself is empty. But they can obviously not take these away, so it still looks like that today. I think next is yours, right? This is a local example. Yeah, this is Kutná Hora in Czechia. So that's also a very, very famous ossuary, very big one. And it's not unique. There's a couple of those in Czechia in the vicinity as well. But this is the most famous one where they really did, let's say, an artwork out of human remains, if you can say so.
I just want to say a little thing about the practices, the traditional one. So if we look at the practices, what was done with these ossuaries, we see there are official practices and, of course, there are unofficial practices. But that will Yves tell you afterwards. The official ones are praying and memento mori. But ossuaries are part of a whole worldview, a Roman Catholic worldview in this time. And I think this is the ossuary of Dingolfing that shows it very well. Because here there are different levels. And the first level is purgatory, where the poor souls are. Then we see the skulls. They are nearer to the great pictures. The great pictures show the four last things. The four last things are death, Gericht is in English. The judgment, yeah. Okay, death, judgment, heaven and hell. And above is the resurrection. And that's also the reason why we have the ossuaries, because for the resurrection, according to Ezekiel and later on, of course, the Apocalypse, you need the bones, you need this fleshly resurrection. And that's also the reason why witches were burned. Not so much to purify them, but to destroy them, because they couldn't resurrect them. It was absolutely impossible. So here we see these bones are really part of in this sort, really theological program. And it was meant, the idea was that you pray here for the poor souls, so they may go out of the purgatory. And we found very interesting practices, official ones. For example, it looks like a picture from somewhere in the world, but it's a picture from Lumbrine in Switzerland, about the 1940s. And there it was common to pray for the poor souls and make a knot in this prayer thing. I don't know in English, what is this? Schnur? A cord, a prayer cord for every paternoster that you did pray. And afterwards you did hang these cords to the skulls. So everyone you could see that you have prayed for the poor souls. But the second function of ossuaries is a memento mori. And a memento mori in the sort of that you are reminded of death during life and, of course, of a good life. And a good life means a life according to the religious norms. And I think this is a nice example. It's the Danse Macabre in Wollhusen, also in Switzerland. And in the wall, there are real skulls, ossuary skulls. They are really, it's very interesting. And here you see what happens if you don't have a good life. You see here the skulls symbolizing death. They do something with the persons. And the interesting one is here in the middle, the innkeeper, because death, what does he do? He kicks him into some parts below. So you see, it's a quite cruel thing. And the innkeeper is a bad person because he brings people to drink and to pay for drinking. For it's a little bit a sin. But of course, there were also unofficial practices.
Yeah, so for example, if you were a thief, or if you are a thief, you could go to the ossuary and remove a finger from a hand, like a tip of the finger, maybe. It should save you from discovery during your next mischief adventure. So basically, they had this belief, and I think they were doing that. Another one was about tooth. So if you had a toothache, you could go to the ossuary and break out or collect a tooth from a skull and I think wear it around the neck just to get your toothache away. The last one is a bit funny one as well. So if you're still wetting your bed, basically you could steal a skull, hopefully with the finger around your neck, so that you didn't get caught, and put it in your leaf sack, which is basically the mattress or however it's called, where you sleep on, and then the bedwetting should stop, hopefully. So we didn't test it. I don't know if it works, but that's what we were told at various places. So this seems to be very, very interesting.
These were unofficial practices. So, of course, Roman Catholic Church didn't like these practices. And there is another one that we really found, a really interesting one. This one is a skull. And you see perhaps these numbers on the skull. That's in the 18th century, the Empress Maria Theresia brought the lottery into the public. It was a 5 out of 90 system. And here we have a lottery skull. It was a magic practice that you should paint the lottery numbers 1 to 90 on the skull, and before midnight. It doesn't work afterwards. And then afterwards you dream the right numbers, for example. But in this time, I think must be from the 19th century, this skull. We don't know it. It's from Austria. There was also a sort of religious lottery in praying for the poor souls. Perhaps it's more official than we think. So we are now researching on this lottery skull. Now today, it's very interesting that ossuaries during the Reformation in the Protestant parts were closed because they were much too nearby the relic cults, of course. In the 19th century, then, in the Roman Catholic parts, they began to close them also. The reasons were various. It was modernity, it was an idea of hygiene, and it was also because they were afraid, by the beginning, tourism, that it would be too creepy for tourists. So today, most ossuaries are not used anymore in this traditional sense. Some are, but mostly not. Today, they are used as small museums, as we can see here. It's in Poschiavo in Switzerland. Or they are hidden because they are too creepy. You see here, the entrance is here behind a gravestone. Or they were changed in other rooms. For example, this one is changed into a toilet. This is very Protestant room. So to conclude, we think just in one sentence, ossuaries are very much a mirror of the culture and time-specific way of dealing with this material level of death. So, one example.
Yeah, another example. So you've seen a couple of pictures previously. This is what it looked like around 1945. This is also in Switzerland. It's overboarding with things, not just skulls, but people were really creating mementos and putting them into the ossuaries. And the next one is how it looks right now. So it looks a little bit different. Don't know. Yeah, it looks a little bit different right now. They're just the skulls. There is a figure on top of it which wasn't there before. But it's also interesting. So this is how times change, I guess.
Yeah, and what interests me mostly is in the first picture, this ossuary is very near. You go there and touch the skulls. You pray to them, you kiss them, And in the second image today, it's behind bars, and perhaps you see these cords. It's an alarm system that no one steals the bones. So you see, it's becoming from a religious room to a room, really a museum room that is apart, that is away from the people. And I think that reflects a little bit changing ideas of not death, but the materiality of death. So yes, thank you very much. Oh,
So yeah, we wanted to thank you as well, especially Miroslav for hosting us. We have a little gift for you, so one of our books. As an appreciation, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So thank you for the book. It is really nice. And space for questions. So let's start with Jeremy.
All right, well, thank you both for that wonderful presentation. So one thing that, I have a lot of classical archaeologist friends, and something that is often discussed is the presentation of human remains, for scholarly purposes, kind of the idea that the dead can't consent to have their remains displayed, in an academic context, and sort of what your presentation got me thinking about is how so culturally specific, the presentation of human remains can be. And the last thing you talked about was this went from a very interactive space with the remains to this is tourism, and this is like objects of curiosity and study, and how that kind of shift in perspective, even though you're not touching them anymore, it makes me think about just the complications around that discussion about, the fact that this is not a devotional space anymore. How does that change the ethics of how we, go and photograph and study these things? And I don't have a fixed view on that. It's just something that I've been thinking about that is maybe worth discussing. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That is perhaps the most important question, and we discussed it over and over with the people, the local people. Here, I think today we always see these sorts of collections of bone through the massacres of the 20th century, and we can't go beyond that. But these people wanted to be in the ossuary, of course, because it was a space of salvation. It was a religious space, and not everyone could come into the ossuary, because the very rich were buried in the churches until the 18th century, and the people that were fallen out of this religious community, of course, weren't even on the cemetery, so they had no chance to come into the ossuary. And the ossuaries are normally near the relics in this Roman Catholic, so near the altars on the outside of the church or something like this. So they are in this space of salvation. It's really something very different than the collections in Verdun or the brutal massacres according to the Second World War and so on. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. We have another question here.
I have a question. I'm not sure I can quite articulate it. I'll try. But bringing it back to the metal and thinking about the fascination or the materiality of death, and thinking about the subgenre of death metal, I'm wondering if the theoretical stuff that you framed it with, the kind of fear of metal, or of death and the unknown, but also the need to kind of touch it, if that can be a connection, another way of connecting this project with metal, with death metal more broadly, or?
I think this. I'm very interested in the reception of these ossuaries, and it's really interesting who likes them. And these are the Roman Catholic people, the local people, and then the metal and Gothic people. It's really a sort of dark tourism that we find here. So I think it has much to do with a sort of metal worldview, because metal really occurs around this, what I've called this uncontrollable, the thing death and all these things, the strong emotions. And this is, of course, a very strong code or symbol for this in our modern worldview. But in a traditional worldview, it couldn't be more religious. So what metal bands do if they put these images on their covers, for example, of album, is they turn it around. It's really a new use of ossuaries, and they make it macabre. But it isn't in the context of the local people there. So it's really a new usage and a new semantic that is used here. I think that could be interesting. Yeah. Okay. And perhaps you could speak about Kutna-Hora, that would be...
Yeah, I mean, that goes into the question of Jeremy before. How do we deal with people wanting to see that? How does the parish deal with visitors or photographers or, I don't know, noisy tourists? It is a place of worship after all. So I was in Kutna-Hora, I don't know, 8 years ago maybe, something like that. In summer, it was 40 degrees hot. And there was some Gothic people there in full makeup with hair like straight up, white makeup with black eyes and stuff like that, and they wanted to visit it. And if you go there, you pay entrance fee, get in, get out. That's standard. It's really tourism there. And people at the cashier's desk, they said, "No way, you won't get in here." And they were like, "Why not?" "Yeah, because you're Satanists, obviously. And this is a church." And I was standing right next to them, behind them in line, and I was listening to the conversation, and basically they refused them entry, and there was one girl, she started crying and tried to explain to the woman at the cashier's desk that they flew in from America just to see this place, and that they're not Satanists, obviously. It's the same tone, obviously, because, you know, it's not like that. And the woman at the cashier's desk said, "No way, you're going to do a satanic mass in here, I know it, you can't get in." And the discussion went on, a couple of minutes, I was standing there just listening, and then they agreed, finally, and she said to the girl there, basically, "Yes, you can get in, but you have to promise me not to perform a satanic ritual inside. And you're not allowed to take pictures." And I was standing there with my camera, like, "Oh." And she only applied this rule to them. I went in, I could take pictures like normal. So basically that's interesting as well, right? So how do people perceive you, or why are you there visiting, and how are you behaving there? And it wasn't meant negative. They were really friendly, the Gothics, and they just wanted to visit in the end, right? So yeah, I don't know.
Very interesting story. By the way, I have been there also 2 years ago, I think. So it wasn't possible to make a photo during the day, but there was some special events in the night where photo was possible. So we were in the night event, so it was really impressive to be at night with candles in this ossuary in Sedlec. So I can recommend it. Are there any other questions? I see there is one.
Yes, thank you very much. My question is about Hallstatt. You have shown one picture where we could have seen these decorated skulls. My question is, have you looked into the decorational styles and how these change, or do they change? What do they mean? And yeah, approximately these are my questions. So what are the contexts of the decoration, and what styles and what changes can we find?
Yes, of course, this is such an interesting topic. The first skull that we found that was decorated is from the early 17th century. But mostly they are from the 19th century. So, and the reason for the decoration is that before these sort of practices, the graves were, as you have seen, were without gravestones. They were unmarked. And then in the 18th, 19th century, I think perhaps because of the Enlightenment and all those debates, it became a new individualism. And the people tried to individualize, and so this sort of thinking about the dead. So they began to paint them. And it's very interesting who paints them, because we found three possibilities. firstly local painters that painted some sort of chairs and also the skulls. Then relatives of the dead, also women, so it's not a male profession. And the third one were painters that went from village to village to paint these things. And the style is very different. The style is a local style. We made a catalogue of the skulls in Galtür, they asked us, and there it's perhaps only one local painter that painted every skull, and they are in gold. And here in Hallstatt, there are local families that painted these skulls. And it's, we see they start with just the writing and become more and more elaborative. And here you see these rows, I don't know in English, my English, I'm a little bit tired as you see, crowns. These are really so 18th, 19th century, and afterwards there are different memento mori symbols coming. But all the symbols on the skulls are really very religious. So for example, the rose is a symbol of the Virgin Mary and of Jesus and the resurrection. Then the snake is of course we see here in the background one that has a snake around it. It's not only the symbol for the snake of paradise, but also the symbol of of course the snake, the Ouroboros, but also the new Jerusalem where the snake has no power anymore, and so on. And then the leaf crowns are also, for example, the oak leaves are the strengths of the believing and the practices. So they are really very religious. What we also have found is in some places there are only, these crowns are only on skulls of young people, perhaps virgins. So yeah, I could speak another half an hour.
Okay, thank you. Is there any question in our online audience?
Maybe just one quick question. Is there a German cross on those skulls? Or? Looks like a German cross.
Yeah, it looks like that, but it's not. So it's basically just a cross in a way. I was thinking the same thing when I was there.
Okay, it looks there are no more questions, so thank you very much for the presentation of that fascination. So I will tell it later.
Yeah, as you've said, many of the ossuaries are lost, so I would like to know, in case, as is in the case of one ossuary turned into a toilet, what happened to the bones? Like, did they relocated it, tossed them away? What happened? That's one question. And the second question, I'm interested, maybe if you can tell me if the ossuary as a place, is it found outside of the Roman Catholic tradition or maybe outside Christian tradition as well? Thanks.
To the first question, so we encountered a couple of examples what they were doing with the bones. Usually they were just buried again. So we had one example in Switzerland where there was a room huge, I don't know, from here to there, full of bones, and they just put them out in front of the church. There was a meadow, and they just buried them there. And another example was when they wanted to do something with the ossuary, and then I think it was the church people, right, in Stans. They just buried them in a night action. So they went in at night, and then they knew if they didn't do it, they would do something else with it. So they buried them again. Like,
that was against scientific research because they had they wanted to make a scientific research and anthropological. So, and the parish didn't want it, so they just buried them. So you see, there is this discussion, of course, that Jeremy.
And the second part about the outside perspective from other religious views, yeah, of course. I mean, there is ossuaries, for example, in Cambodia, the killing fields, but this is like a genocide memorial, right? So it's not the same thought behind it. There's mummies everywhere, which is a similar thing. Buddhist mummies in Japan, they have mummies, stuff like that. There is some things, but it's mainly a Roman Catholic thing, I would say.
Perhaps the nearest to this is in Orthodox tradition. in the mountain altos, and so they have these sorts of ossuaries also, even painted ones. Yeah.
Okay, so we are in the end. So thank you very much again.